Lovely. So thank you, Tamsin, for coming on to the Be Lively Club. Very excited to have you here. Can you just tell us a little bit about yourself before we get going?
Yeah, so I am a menopause body image coach. So I do help women with menopause, but I help them more around their self-image, self-worth, self-confidence. And I do help women with all aspects of that in like how it's affecting their entire life, how they're running their business, how they might be showing up at work, how they're managing their relationships, all of that stuff. So yeah, that's me.
Ah,
Short,
amazing.
short and sweet.
Yeah. So we're going to be talking a little bit more about both our experiences of rage. I think as women who are going through perimenopause symptoms or do struggle with their hormones, if they are in that kind of in their reproductive years, um, you know, I just wanted you to kind of share a little bit more about your personal experience and how the menopause or the perimenopause transition has really affected you, and how those changes have kind of like impacted your daily life and your relationships.
Yeah, so when I was 38, I went back to work after having my second and last child. Um, and I noticed a significant shift in like my mood and stuff like that. And it was very linked to my cycle, but I was really, really struggling from that sort of age. So it was, I want to say 2018 to 2019 was probably the worst year of my life for
Mm,
many, many reasons. But the rage that I was feeling and this a feeling of wanting to just walk away from
mm,
everything that I had. I mean, I had like a 1 year old and a 3.5 year old. Didn't feel great. Oh no, actually she was 4.5, sorry. Um didn't feel really good. I felt so ashamed. I didn't want to tell anyone. And I just kept having these like major bouts of rage. And I started to Google it because I was like, this isn't normal. Like it's not like just a bit of like me being a bit grumpy or a bit off. I'm talking like throwing things. I'm talking
mm,
like just complete outbursts for what seemed to be no reason. And it just wasn't rational. Like I could be literally so rational in 1 minute, and then the next minute just be completely flying off the handle. And I was terrifying my kids, I'm not going to lie, and I
mm,
was terrified
mm,
of myself, and my husband didn't really know what to do. And luckily I can talk to him about absolutely anything. And I said to him, like, I just don't feel like myself. I feel like something is going on, and I don't know what it is.
mm,
I had been in and out of the doctor sort of with this sort of kind of stuff with like a low, very flat mood, and
mm,
they had said that I just maybe needed to go on the pill to balance my hormones out, and I was like, okay, so I tried that for a while and that just flatlined me. Like my personality was gone. Like you could have told me the
mm,
funniest joke in the world and I'd have just gone, okay. And I had nothing. And then
mm,
that pill actually made me feel, sent me down more than it did anything else. So
yeah.
I recognized that, stopped taking that. But I was Googling everything and not once did perimenopause come up. Not once. Nothing to do with hormones, all to do with like PMT or maybe even PMDD, which I explored for a while. Um, so that went on to the point where I left my job. I actually left my 20-year career where I had climbed and fought my way in a very male
Mm,
dominated industry and I had a very decent income, and I couldn't hold it together because I just couldn't. This cycle would continue. I
yeah.
felt like I was like pressing this destruct button on my life, and then I was going around like picking up the pieces going, oh, sorry about that, sorry about that, that's mine, I just put this back in. I just
Yeah.
felt awful. But I also had lost interest in so many things. I'd lost interest in my job, which was like I'd been doing it for 20 years. Like
Mm,
I had so much experience, but I would go into work every day thinking, I don't know anything. I don't know anything. And I kept saying to my boss, like, all the information has fallen out of my head. I want to retrain. She's like, you don't need to retrain. You've been doing this stuff your whole life since you were 18. And I was like, I know, but I feel like I need to step down. I want to get a demotion. I tried everything. I took days off sick. I handed over
mm,
big punchy projects to other people, mainly men in my team, because I didn't want to be in front of the big bosses. And everything just started to push away and fall apart. And I left on a break, like an unpaid leave type break, and I never went back. And I did regain all of this stuff, and I regained like my, and I honestly feel like I could probably walk back in there now and do the exact same job, and I would just pick it up like that, no problem,
Yeah.
because of where I am now. But I choose not to, because I think the stress and the strain of it like probably wouldn't do me any good. Um, but yeah, it was a horrible time, and I just didn't know myself, and it wasn't until I was
Mm.
able to really sit down and go, right, let's reevaluate everything. I still didn't know that it was menopause related until the last, let's say, 12 months. I've really recognized that that's what that
Yeah.
was. I
Yeah.
now understand that. Does that
Yeah.
make sense?
I think it is really hard when we don't know what's going on. And then, because I think as a society, women are meant to just be shut up, be nice. And so when we don't show up in our relationships, and particularly with our kids, because they're at such a
Yeah.
difficult time in their lives, really, aren't they? In terms, if you're shouting at them and you absolutely lose it, and I completely feel you, Tamsin, like that. Yeah, I can probably, even this morning, just absolutely, yeah, really just finding it hard to
Mm,
keep ourselves regulated, and I think there's a lot of talk and space around, being a regulated person, and 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 it almost just feels like, oh, this is another thing that I'm failing at,
yeah.
and I think it's really hard for women to, you know, actually acknowledge, I am angry, I am frustrated, but then equally acknowledging that that response did
Yeah.
not, was not equal to the issue at hand.
Yeah.
It was,
Absolutely.
yeah, it was completely disproportionate to
Yeah.
the issue, and I think that's when, yeah, we need to kind of look and go,
And this is
actually, what's
why,
led to that point.
yeah, this is why I'm so passionate about helping women with this now, because and most people don't have the luxury of leaving their job,
No.
and we don't have that option to pass off work to other people or call in sick consistently and not lose our job. We don't, and I think it's just, if I'd have had the tools and the support in that at that time, and people weren't like, I wasn't even thinking about perimenopause at that point. I was 30. I'm like, I've just had a baby. When I left, I was 39, nearly 40, and
Yeah.
I hadn't long had it. I In my brain, I was like, but I'm still in my fertile years. Didn't occur to me about the fact that we went through IVF, but it just didn't connect. And I think this is what we talk
Mm.
about all the time, is that I'm so disconnected from my body and how my body works and how my body is aging and what things happen. I'm 44 now, and my mum will still say to me, it's hard to imagine that you're in perimenopause because you're too young. And I'm like, blimey, okay, nothing's landing. Like, no one's understanding. And I
Yeah.
think if somebody have had a conversation with me about how this stuff begins and how it declines, and one of
Yeah.
the very first early signs when you look at it on Google will be that your periods change and you start to get irregular periods, or they change their length. That, I actually don't think that's true. That's
No,
not my
it's not.
experience. It's not all the women's experience that I've had.
No.
And often a lot of mood changes and feeling disconnected and feeling this like anxiety and fear over like being, I kept saying like I was going to be found out at work, and they were going to be like,
Yeah.
oh my god, have you tricked us through this system where you've got to the senior level and you don't actually know anything. That's what I thought was going to happen. I thought I was
Yeah.
going to walk in on Monday morning every week and someone was going to go, you don't actually know what you're doing, do you? And I was going to go, oh my god, you found me out. Okay, yeah, I'm here at my desk.
Yeah.
And I did
Yeah.
it for them. I did it for them, and they were just like confused, like, why are you leaving? Like, and I blamed it on other things, but it's now an eye opener to me, and I just think, oh my gosh, if somebody had that conversation with me. So I do think it's important to
Yeah.
share how I felt completely like, like odds with myself, but I share a lot of the language that I was using so that other people can go, oh, hang on a minute, I've been using that language too,
Yeah. Yeah.
because
That
it's
inner
really
voice.
important, that inner voice.
Yeah. And I think, mentioning back onto that being too young, just because the average age of menopause, so menopause is only one
Menopause.
day in your life. So that's 12 months after your last period.
Mm,
Okay. So that is when you are in menopause. But the time leading up to that, there are these big fluctuations of
yeah,
hormones. Okay. And it's those fluctuations, our brain's really sensitive to that, and that's why we get all these kind of brain cognitive changes, and our emotional regulation is just very, very off.
yeah,
um, and
absolutely.
and I think when we can put park that as a physiological thing that's happening in our brain that
Yeah.
can cause us to behave in this manner. But equally, it's acknowledging that so we can take away the shame and the blame of this being, oh, this is just me being a really awful person. But actually going, actually, what are the things that I can do to try and help keep my cup or stop my cup from overflowing?
Mm.
Because there's always going to be. I remember when we had a dog who was always a bit anxious, and the dog trainer always said the cup analogy. And I know we use the cup analogy in lots of other places, but the thing
Yeah.
I liked about her was that she said there were signs your dog is stressed, agitated, annoyed way before the overflowing, which often is a bite, or they're sort of in a defensive mood. But that could be yawning, it could be shaking off. They're like, I'm not liking this situation. And I think sometimes it's really important for people around us as well to acknowledge when they can see that we're struggling, or we're already kind of like going, oh, for God's sake, just eat your
Yeah.
dinner.
Yeah.
Oh, would you just, and actually stepping in and going, okay, do you want to swap? And just allowing us a bit of space to kind of
Yeah.
not get so riled up. And I think if we recognize behaviors in our partner, like we would recognize those pre-behaviors in a dog, that we can then
Mm.
de-escalate the situation and
Yeah.
support that woman. And also, even in the workplace is going, oh, I can see so and so's a bit
Mm.
dismissive today, or she's just like a bit more in herself. Maybe I could step up a little bit more today, rather than going, oh, Tracy's on a mood today, like.
I know this
And
is
I
the
think,
language, isn't it, around it, and
yeah,
the wet, and that's what my mum was treated like. I
yeah,
remember like, oh, don't go near your mum today, like that kind of language. Not like, oh, what does she need right now? Like it was just
yeah,
shaming her for the mood she was in, and no one really asking her why that might be,
mm,
and whether she needed something different. And I think and I certainly did this myself. I set my life up to be very full pelt. It was very, it was all or nothing, and it was
mm,
very, I was the person that did all the stuff. I was the person who looked after all the people in the team, to make sure they were happy, because I was called the one that did all the pink and fluffy stuff, even though I was managing massive contracts, multi-million-pound contracts for military
mm,
helicopters. It was a hell of a job. But also I was a specialist, although by the end of it I was like, I know nothing. But I was a specialist
yeah,
in logistics in what I did. So that's a very small area of what is needed to support a helicopter, say,
yeah,
you know, and I was a specialist. So there wasn't many people you could farm that off to. Does that
yeah,
make sense? So
yeah,
if I was having a difficult day, I mean, I did have an amazing team, but equally, I couldn't have just picked up their work either. So
no,
it became very narrow, and I think that happens to a lot of women. Maybe we might be running our own business. I think about the business that I run now, and I'm like, okay, if I fall down,
yeah,
this is all gone. There's no one
yeah,
here to pick it up. There's no team. Um, and this is why I talk to women about what support systems have you got in place with your partners, with the people around you. Like, who is your support system? Are they supporting you, or are they draining you? And
yeah,
I'm, my podcast episode, I can't remember what I called it now, but if I didn't call it this, I was going to call it like, is it perimenopause or is it your husband?
yeah,
Because
yeah, yeah,
there are so many women I speak to who have set their life up to be the one who does everything and
yeah,
the
the default
caregiver.
person, yeah,
Yeah, and that's having a massive impact on them. And because they've hit perimenopause, and I have friends who I look at and I think, you're a little bit younger, but when you hit this phase of your life, what you have set up is going to come crashing down, and I'm going to
um,
have to do nothing but stand back and watch it, because you're not understanding, because you've got all
mm,
the energy in the world, and you've got and you're just doing all the things, and I just think that's going to decline,
yeah, yeah,
and I
yeah,
don't know how to tell them.
yeah, and I think your resilience does change, and I think, and also you're you kind of give less about stuff,
Yeah,
so it's, and then those relationships that have been doing relatively well, you know, you might have some resentment there, but when it really starts to go down and then you don't
Yeah.
feel supported or listened to, and that's when things can really start to fall apart, which is a real shame because I
Yeah.
know that through working with a local menopause coach as well, you know, she said like there's been like talks with like big groups of men that she's educated menopause on, and they've gone, this is really interesting. I wonder if actually if we'd known about this more, I'd probably be still married to my first wife.
This is it. I think this so, and I watch it in our Facebook group with lots of women who have, ended their relationships around this time, and it's definitely linked. It's definitely linked because I
Mm,
think the more, and I am just talking about heterosexual relationships here in terms of the what people are saying, but the men have this tendency to pull away when they don't understand things and when things get a bit like, oh, I don't know how to handle this,
yeah,
and they tend to disconnect, and then that makes the resentment get worse, and then you just can't like kind of come back together. It's very
yeah,
difficult. And this is what I mean. It's like the same with jobs, it's the same with relationships, and friendships as well can really
mm,
suffer with
yeah,
a lot of this stuff because we get very in our own heads about whether someone's thinking something of us, whether they're, supporting us enough, and we can get this. It can be a really tricky time for
mm,
all kinds of relationships with teenage kids. I've got a daughter who's 10, coming very much into puberty as I am like exiting that. And it is an
yeah,
interesting dynamic, a really interesting
yeah. I bet because
dynamic.
again, it's a typical symptom that we completely recognize in teenagers.
Yeah,
And we're just like, oh, you know, they're just going through their teenage, they're getting their hormones and they're getting used to it. And we give them a little bit of slack,
yeah,
you know, whereas we don't do that for the other end of the big, you know,
totally.
sort of the end of our sort of reproductive life. And
Yeah.
it is like this sort of like, oh, this shame around it. And I think
Mm,
and I just it is frustrating. I think it's really sad that we don't let women at that point in their lives have the space to be, you know, to sort of go through this
agree.
transition,
Yeah.
being held a little bit more. Um,
Mm,
you know, and I think, you know, as for myself, I'm 35 and I've got a family history of early menopause. So my mum and my nan were close to 40 when they had their last
yeah.
period. And so if
Wow.
you've got a perimenopause of 10 years, say, you
Mm,
know, that could, you know, and I'm lucky I have children. I've never had an issue with my reproduction, if that makes sense. But in terms of my cycles every month, I have horrendous mood, you know, and it's awful. I'm like a different person. And anyone who knows me knows that I'm quite bubbly and outgoing, really
yeah.
energetic. I love to do stuff, but I can be absolutely the other way sometimes. And that in
Mm,
itself, it's unsettling. It's unsettling for your family because they're going, one minute you were fine, and then now you're like this
yeah.
demonic, like human. And it's so hard because then you think like, oh, maybe I'm, you know, and I think if you've got a, you know, a bit of neurodiversity or anything like that, you
Yeah.
know, a lot of women really notice this as they go through this transition. You know, it's you can really internalize and think, oh God, am I this fraud? Or, you know, and I think that's what often adds the anxiety. And we don't
Yeah.
necessarily then do the work that we're really passionate about and want to do and progress because we're just worried that we're going to be caught out.
Yeah.
I'd really
And
love to know anyone who's listening to this.
I
Is this like a universal feeling of feeling like you're going to be caught out and you're not the real you?
yeah.
Or, you know, it's really hard. It's real mind.
I polled this question in the group, in my Facebook group, and yes, women are saying the same thing, and that's what I mean. It's the same language. They're like using this like I'm going to be found out. I'm going to be like I'm a fraud. I have to leave because it's not fair on my colleagues. That is coming up a lot. It's very interesting to see
Yeah.
that language, and I think when it comes to like how we help ourselves through this and how we might reframe it, or how we might kind of survive this time, the biggest thing that we can do is get ourselves to the top of that list. Our own, this whole list we have of things to do, and I know you're busy today, I'm busy today. Like, are we at our joy, our pleasure, our like supporting ourselves? If it's not at the top of our list, but when I go through this with clients, it's like it's so alien for them to think that they are at the top of their list, and there's
Yeah.
things that they want to discover. They've heard about breath work, they want to like know more about it, but they're scared of being seen as silly in front of their husband, and they don't get much time to themselves, so they don't explore it fully. They
Mm.
might do like a little YouTube video when everyone's out of the house, but that's it, and it never goes any further. Or they don't want to start going to like a yoga class or sign up to a gym because the people around them don't know them as that person. And
Yeah.
so they think it's going to be, I don't know, not laughed at, but like not seen as a priority because it's
Yeah.
unusual for them to prioritize themselves.
Yeah. I think it's really hard because I remember when I first started, when I had my first son, um, when I, after about a year, I was like, right, I really want to get back into working out again. And I'd found a kettlebell class and I was going. And every time I went, my husband was like, oh, so you're going again, are you? And it was like, yeah, I'm gonna go and, do, and it took me a while to really kind of get him out of this mindset of going, I'm not being selfish here. I am trying to have a bit of time on my own, going to do something that's benefiting my health. If I could go and live in a cave with no one in there, I would absolutely spend my money there, as long as it
I'll
had
put
a
no
nice
stamp
view. I don't want to be in the
duty,
dark, you
just a
know.
nice cake.
But just to be quiet and, like,
Yeah,
but I need that in order for me. And I did say to him, I said, look, if I don't go to this class, I don't know if I can be a nice person to be around. I just need a bit of time to myself, get some energy out. I'm just constantly looking after this child, which is lovely. I love him dearly. We've had a really stressful year. And actually, I just want to do this one thing for myself. And eventually he was like, oh, okay. But I think it's also their conditioning that
yeah,
women are always around to do stuff and
yeah.
be around, and they're the person that they cling on to as a dependent in a way,
Mm,
um, to sort out their social issues.
yeah,
My husband's a bit much more sociable than he used to be, and that's mainly because we pair quite well together. But
yeah.
and his family always say, oh, he probably wouldn't be as sociable with us if he hadn't married you, Emily. And it's like, yeah, but we need to still have these separate
Mm,
things that make us us. And I have absolutely reframed doing anything like exercising, doing my breath work, going for a coffee with a friend as
yeah,
absolutely self-care that I need to get away from work, from my kids, from my husband, and not have any shame or feel guilty about that. Because anyway, guilt's a wasted emotion in my book. So
yeah. So true. I
that's
mean, I had
it.
a while back when I could afford it. I had a cleaner. I don't have her anymore. I miss her every day.
Oh, I love her.
I had a cleaner once every 2 weeks, and she used to, she obviously came around and cleaned the house, and she was like, "Oh, I've noticed you've got like loads of crystals everywhere." She's like, "How do you like know what to do with them?" And I was like, I don't actually. I just really enjoy having them. I enjoy, looking up the properties of them and understanding a bit more about them. And she was like, "Oh, I just think like I'd love to like do that, but I think my husband would think I'd lost the plot." And it's like that makes me sad because I just think,
Yeah,
you know what, it's something that you need, and this is the problem. Like you don't want to necessarily just suddenly. It's a very different thing, but I think this is where relationships, we have to be able to grow together and
yeah,
explore those different
absolutely.
parts of ourselves as women. When I'm not the same person I was in my 20s. If I'd have said in my 20s like this is what you're going to be like in your 40s, I'd have been like, oh god, I'm not looking forward to that. Like,
Yeah,
I go to bed at like 9 o'clock at night, or like, I drink tea instead of wine, and it's just all the things that I do, and I just think, oh, that would sound very boring to like a younger version of me. But
yeah,
actually, as I have grown, and I'm very lucky that I have a relationship that I can expand in,
yeah,
in so many different ways, and I can take up more space, and I don't have to stay in this little bubble that makes my
yeah,
husband feel secure. And I think that's really, really important. Is so
yeah.
important.
And I think, I've got a 1-year-old daughter, and I want her to take up space. I don't want her to be conforming to what, and I think a lot of this guilt around being ragey is around this perfectionist
Yeah,
societal expectation that women should just sort of, I know we've come a long way from the 1950s,
yeah.
but I do feel that
Well,
there's
I
still
mean,
there's
I
you know,
don't know
there's
whether
still yeah,
in so
there's
many
still
ways when we're seeing a lot of our rights taken away, you know, and you're seeing like the abortion rights and all that kind of stuff, like I feel like sometimes we're pedaling backwards, and there's
yeah,
so much
definitely.
more diet culture out there now with like Ozempic and everything else. I think we're going back into the excuse me, thin is in rhetoric.
Yeah,
uh,
definitely.
excuse me. um what I was going to say was, you know, when it comes to putting yourself to the top of your list and like getting more support in your household, I had a really interesting client that I was working with, and she was doing all of that. She had teenage kids at home. She was ragey as, like, honestly, like ragey, like off the charts ragey with her partner, and they were getting married and everything. And she just felt like she was just losing it all the time.
Yeah,
And she had these teenage kids that were home on and off between going to their dads and stuff, but and they had support needs. And she was just getting all the training. We would go through these sessions, and it's like a 6 week course, and we're going through it. And you know, she starts getting to the place where we're building blocks on asking others for help. And
yeah.
actually, do you know what? Are you the only person in the house who can do that? Or are there others that could be
Mm,
involved in that process, all that kind of stuff? We get to a really good place where people are like, they've got like a, it sounds a bit extreme, but she managed to set up like a chart, because she sat them down and said, like, I can't do this anymore. Like, I physically need different things now. And she put this chart together, and everyone had their different responsibilities. And like a couple of weeks later, and she's like, the problem is, I just still feel like it's not gone. And then we
yeah,
started breaking it down. I was like, okay, so partner's gonna do the cooking tonight, okay? So at what point do you, like, where do you leave that process? She's like, well, all day I'm like looking at it going, he hasn't done the shopping yet, he hasn't. I'm like, okay, it's the mental load. You're
yeah,
carrying that, you've given him that responsibility, but you haven't given him the entire task, because
yeah,
you're still thinking about it. Same
mm,
with the dishes. You're asking your teenage daughter to do it, but when she hasn't done it by like midday, you're then like getting ragey because you're like, when are you going to do
yeah,
it? But you've got to, but it's about getting the help, but letting people actually do it, and
yeah,
let them fail, because they will fail at supporting you, no doubt about it, like 100%,
yeah.
especially if they're not used to it.
Everyone sucks at something to start with, don't they?
Same
So,
with work, you know, you might
yeah,
start again. It's like, I think it's really important to think about your job. And you know, and again, yet another client who had to put in some really solid boundaries around work, because she worked part-time. So she had Thursday and Fridays where she didn't work, but they would call her or ask her to give up that day, or there was always this like creeping.
yeah,
And it was like, oh, can't you just do this because it's your day off? And then when she actually did get a day off where she wasn't taking any calls, she was just lying in bed. That's not filling your cup, because all you're
no,
doing is recovering
yeah,
from a very stressful job. Like, that's not where
yeah,
we want to be. So
no,
it's things like
no.
that can really help bring that rage and that resentment down.
Yeah, no, yeah, I think it is that kind of cup analogy, isn't it? It's just knowing what is going to help reduce that load in your cup. I think that, we are going to be different to men, just the way we are conditioned, our brains work anyway on a physiological level, they're very different.
Mm,
And we do take on the different sort of default parenting, the kind of mental load. I'm very lucky, my husband's very good and does a lot of stuff. But I was even questioning myself the other day because I was going, oh, your daddy's so good, he takes you to nursery. And I'm thinking, but I get the same applause if I did the same, it's like, no.
no,
And I do, it's so hard, isn't it?
yeah,
To really, yeah, when you dig deeper into it, I think there's a lot
there's a lot.
around
And so
around
much of the
there.
language we use around it, like, oh, I'm so lucky that my husband, and it's like, this
Yeah, I
is
know,
actually
I
a
know,
partnership
I
from the
know, I
beginning.
know.
And I
Yeah.
use that language too. I was teasing my husband yesterday because he comes into the room and he's like talking to the dog, and he's like, oh, he's such a good dog. And I'm like, I've just changed the bedding and I've just cooked dinner. Like, where's
Yeah.
my praise? The dog's just breathing.
Yeah.
It's like
Probably
a big
loudly as
ball of
well.
fur. He hasn't done anything. He's just sitting there. Like, why are you telling him he's a good dog?
Yeah.
Bit of a joke in our house.
Oh, I know. I feel like there's a lot to unpack, but we're at half an hour, so I feel like we
Yeah,
should let
absolutely.
everyone get on with the rest of their day. But
Absolutely.
hopefully, everyone's felt a little bit more recognised
Yeah, completely normal.
in the challenges of fluctuating hormones, the challenges of life, default parenting. It's hard, and I think we're all doing an amazing job. Even listening to this, if you are listening to this, the fact that you're just trying to learn to kind of help yourself, is a really good thing. So yeah,
Yeah,
thanks so much for your time, Tamsin,
you're
and
welcome.
you know,
Thank
I'll
you.
see you again anyway.
Yeah, see.
But yeah, I really enjoyed our chat as always, and yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Speak soon.
Take care. Bye.
Bye.